Adobe Fresco is a cool new digital art app with brushes imitating real watercolor and oil painting. In this video, I'm going to show you the full creative process of turning a photograph into a digital mixed media artwork by using purely my iPad and Apple Pencil. On the left side of my iPad, you can see the photo that I'm going to use for this tutorial. And on the right side in Adobe Fresco, you can see the final result. Now, if you want to follow along and try out the techniques, you can download this image from the Milanote board, which is included in the description below. I also added a couple of other really cool photos from the same site, which you can try out and turn into a digital mixed media artwork. But let's focus on Adobe Fresco. So what I'm going to do is to start a fresh new document. So I will say create new, and I'm going to work on an A4 size. So let's just choose this. By the way, here you can always switch to landscape, or if we go back, we can switch to portrait. I'm going to select that. And I'm going to place the photo into this empty document by tapping on this icon here on the left, and then choose camera roll, because I already have this image prepared, and I'm just going to place it in. I will make it slightly smaller, something like that, and then done here on the top right. And now we are ready to roll. Now, of course, in Adobe Fresco, you don't have to start from a photograph. You can just start painting on a blank canvas. But for those that are not that great at drawing or painting, this method can be an interesting way to combine photography and drawing. So first thing I'm going to do is to separate the woman from the background. I would like to place her on a separate layer. And for this, I'm going to zoom a little bit closer and I'll show you how I would normally make this separation. So I prefer to work with the lasso tool. I'm just going to have that selected and I'm going to make a quick selection around her. I can include a little bit of the reflection as well. And as you can see, this is just going to be a very rough selection. By the way, I'm using Apple Pencil and an iPad Pro. It's the 2019 version. So now that I have my selection, I can turn this into a mask by going into the settings here on the right and choose Create a Mask. Then I'm just going to convert it. So that's perfect, but we need the background as well to be visible. So for this, I am going to swipe left so I can see my layer thumbnail and then click again on the additional settings and choose duplicate layer. On this bottom layer, I'm going to swipe to the right to see the mask and I'm going to click again in the extra options and choose invert mask. So what happened now is that we have both layers. So you can see here when I swipe back again, we have the background layer and then we have the layer on top. I'm going to hold down the touch shortcut here on the left and double tap on the layer on the top just so I can hide it quickly and show it again by double tapping. The same thing I'm going to do, double tap on the background, double tap again. So you can see exactly what's on each layer. And the good thing about masking is that I can go back to the layer on top, and while having the mask selected, I can use a brush to hide and show details from this layer. So if I switch to hide here at the bottom, and then I start painting, you can see how it's starting to remove from the image. Now, of course, for this, I would normally use a basic brush. The hard round size flow is a good one for this. So with this, if I start drawing, you can see the edge that it's going to create. And I can zoom even closer and then get a really nice refined selection here. Now, the main advantage of masking is that it's non-destructive, which means if I accidentally paint into the details that I need, I can just switch to reveal at the bottom and I can paint over it. So that's just much easier way of creating really nice selections. Now, of course, you don't really need to have a perfect selection for this example. I just wanted to show you that this method is my preferred way of setting up everything. I'm going to speed this bit up just so you can see how I refine the selection, and then we will move on turning the background into watercolor details. So now that we have our selection ready, I can switch back to the background layer, have that one selected, and I'm going to work with live brushes. Now, live brushes are brilliant because, first of all, they can replicate or simulate really well traditional media like oil painting and watercolor. But the cool thing is that they can also be used to turn photographs into paintings. So all you have to do for this is to select the brush that you want to work with. I'm going to use the watercolor wash soft for this, and I'm going to just tap on the image somewhere. And most importantly, this is what you need to make sure you do. You need to change the opacity of your brush here. If you keep it 100%, I'm just going to show you if I have, let's say, a red color selected and start painting with that, that is going to be painted onto the photo, but even this is already start to blend with the photograph. Now it is hard to see it at this point, so I'm going to undo this by using 2-finger tap on the screen and select again the color and reduce the opacity all the way down. Now there's also a shortcut for this. If you tap this little icon here, that's quickly resetting or setting the opacity to 0%. Now I can increase my brush size here on the left. So I'm going to just increase it up quite big and then start painting. And notice what's happening. It's almost like we are just putting pure water onto the canvas and there's no actual paint added. It's just going to blend all these details together. Now, of course, you can control how wet you want this to be by changing the water flow on the left side. So if I reduce that down a bit, I'm going to zoom closer just so you can see it. Now, if I paint, it's not as abstract after painting over the details. So if I just undo a little bit these couple of brush strokes here, when I start painting now, you can see we maintain a little bit more of the original details. And I think that's quite good. So I would like to achieve something where I can still make out roughly what was there in the image, but also make sure that we get more abstract result. So I'm just going to paint over here and then keep doing the same thing. This is probably the most fun you will have in Adobe Fresco. Really just trying to control the brush strokes that you are doing. So maintain some detail, some level of detail, but also at the same time, you are trying to get abstraction or abstract results, because that's what's going to make it look like it's a painting. And what we are going to do is to refine some of the details later. We will actually paint over some of these details. So we are not cheating all the way. We will actually put some effort into adding some of the details back. So we will use the original details as a guide, but then we will add some details back. And I'm just going to go over the edges first, and then we will focus on the details near the woman in the picture. So keep going all around, trying to maintain some level of detail, but I think that's quite good already. Maybe just add a bit more paint here on the top as well on the sky. And then now we can zoom closer, because the problem with a mask in these cases is that it's going to maintain that very rigid, sharp edge. So remember, if I swipe right here on the right side, on this layer we have a mask. Now, although I like to keep things non-destructive, in these cases I would actually change this by going into the additional settings and choose Flatten Mask. And what happens when you do this is that your mask will be removed, but you still have the original selection that you worked with. And the good thing about this is if I go back to my brush that I was working with and start painting over the edges here, notice how it will be able to go beyond the original edges. So the water flow, if I increase, it will go even faster, but you can see I can very quickly fill up those details. And I think that looks like a quite nice result. Now I'm going to use the same effect on the layer on top, just for the water details. So with a bit reduced size, I'm going to paint over that. But once again, I feel like we will have issues with the mask here, just like before. So I'm going to again go into the additional settings and choose Flatten Mask. So now if I start painting, this can nicely blend and go further than the original outlines. and I can create a nice blend here. We will refine this later, but for now, I think this worked quite well. So the main reason we created that selection in the beginning is to make sure that we are not messing up the details on the woman and that we can apply the watercolor details selectively on the background. Now, as I mentioned, so we are not cheating all the way. We are going to paint some details back on the background. And to do this, I'm going to create a new layer. That layer can be on top of everything else. And I'm going to zoom a little bit closer here and still continue to use the same brush, but I switch to the watercolor round detail. So still a live brush, but I'm going to use 100% opacity this time. I'm going to sample a color from the mountain by tap and holding over it. You can see I can pick any of these colors. I would like to use a darker green, something like that. Zoom a little bit even closer, and I'm going to start painting. Now, notice that when I do this, I can paint with whatever attribute I have currently set to the brush. And because our brush water flow is quite low, I can maintain quite nice sharp edges on these details. If I increase the water flow, when I paint, it's going to run a little bit further out. But once again, because we are working on a separate layer, there's nothing to blend with at this moment. So it's a completely dry layer. So in comparison, if I select the background layer and on that I use the same brush, it just completely gets blurred out. So that's not really what I can use for refinement and adding details. So let's switch back to the top layer. I'm going to paint a bit more here, more details, and just keep painting. But now we also need to blend this into the background. So to be able to do that, I'm going to sample another color from here and just paint with a little bit bigger brush around the edges. And notice how this is going to create that nice blend or transition. Now let me show you that masks can also be used for creative results, like creating a more interesting edge for the whole artwork. I'm going to select the background layer and go back to the options and create another mask for this. So create empty mask. And then from the brushes, I'm going to go to my favorites and select this one called Cezanne 2. This, by the way, is from the painting category. And within there, you will find it. So Cezanne 2. And using this brush, I make sure I have the hide option selected here at the bottom. And I can just simply paint around the edges to basically delete into it a bit on the right side as well. Carve into the painting. That might be a little bit too much there on the top. Yeah, something like that. And also at the bottom, I can do a more interesting edge. So again, the good thing about masking is that it's completely non-destructive. So if I don't want to see the mask, I can get rid of it, or I can just temporarily hide it as well with this icon here on the right. So if I tap on that, I can see without the mask and with the mask. Before we continue, I just wanted to let you know about our creative membership program. For a small monthly fee, you get access to over 200 hours of Adobe certified online training courses. Master all the tools and skills needed to become a professional graphic designer or illustrator. As a pro member, you will get mentoring from me and my team, access to webinars, student forum, and creative briefs to help you build an outstanding portfolio. Pro members can also download the project files for all of our YouTube tutorials. Sign up at yesimadesigner.com/memberships and start your free trial today. And now let's head back to the tutorial. Now it's time to turn the woman into painting as well. And normally I would do this with watercolor, but just to be able to show you both oil and watercolor to you in this tutorial, I'm actually going to use oil brushes in this case. So I will switch to the other category from live brushes, select oil. And for this one, I think I'm going to use this one, the Filbert brush. Zoom a little bit closer. And similarly to the watercolor, when we paint over photographs, we first need to set this to 0%, so remove the opacity. By the way, if you have the brush set to 100% and have a color selected, let's say something like that, with which you are painting, you can still temporarily access the 0% opacity option by holding down the touch shortcut. So if I do that, notice that I can paint over the image and it's always going to just use whatever colors we have in the photograph. So it's a dry brush essentially, without any color added to it. But I prefer not to keep holding that down. Instead, I'm just switching to 0%, and then I can really concentrate on the details that I'm doing. So I'm going to start with the skirt, and I'm going to start painting over that. Now, I will make my brush a little bit bigger, and I will also check the flow settings. Maybe flow can be reduced slightly, and paint mix can be on maximum. That's actually fine. So remember, because we don't have a mask edge, we can always go beyond the edge as well, so we don't need to be too worried about that. I'm trying to turn this really into a painting, so I'm making it more abstract. I'm removing all that subtlety and detail from the skirt or the dress, but I'm making sure that I maintain some detail and especially the tonal values. So I would like this to continue to look like cloth, and I am following with my brush strokes the direction and just go up and down a couple of times, something like that. So that you can see already starts to look more like a painting, and then we can continue drawing or painting on the dress. In this case, I'm painting more like sideways. And then let's do the hair, maybe a bit smaller brush here. So the hair is usually quite fun, and then just paint over the hair. This brush is quite nice for hair. I like the results that it's creating. Now, don't worry about losing details because you don't want it to look too realistic. And of course, you can always paint over it like we've done before with the trees. So you can introduce some additional details later. But generally, you want to achieve a more abstract painterly result. And I'm going to go over the hands as well, just very quickly. There you go, so you can see it looks much more like an oil painting now. My biggest concern is that, of course, oil paint brushes would have the canvas texture on them, while the watercolor won't have that. By the way, this is something you can control, so if you don't want to see the canvas, just go into brush settings and remove the canvas texture from here. I'm not too bothered about it in this case because I wanted to show you both types of brushes so you can clearly see the difference between them. But there's a few more additional things I wanted to do here. First of all, I wanted to refine the reflection a bit. I'm going to do this again on a separate layer. So select separate layer, zoom closer here. Go back to the Live Brushes watercolor options, and I will use the round detail brush. I will set the opacity back to 100%, and I will sample a color from the water, something like that. And I'm just rotating my screen a bit and draw a couple of lines in, maybe increase the brush size a bit. So I'm trying to create a reflection or like water effect here. Basically the reflection on the water that we are adding there, which breaks up the details a bit for us. And we can even include a few here, anywhere where there's some dark details. This would work quite nicely. And even here in the foreground, this just adds a little extra detail in the whole painting. Now we can also introduce maybe another brighter color like this and just paint over it with that as well. So a little bit more specks and highlights on the water. I think that's quite nice. Now comes another interesting detail, paint an island in the background. So once again, I'm going to create another new layer. zoom closer, and I am going to use the same brush, but this time I'm going to sample a color from the mountain, something like this. I don't want it to stand out too much, so I try to reduce the contrast by doing this. Okay, I'm just checking the composition as well. I think that's a quite good position for it. Then we can paint the church. I would like to have a church here, or like a little sanctuary or chapel. I'm going to select maybe this color from the mountain, and I will paint over here. Something like that. And I don't mind it blending into the island details. I think that looks quite nice. I will sample again this detail here and just paint some reflection indication. Then I'm going to get a darker color that we can use for the trees and just paint some trees here on the island. We can also get maybe a different color. And if you want to avoid colors mixing too much together, so for example, if I wanted to paint the top of the church, the steeple, with, let's say, something a bit more reddish, notice that it's going to blend completely and I can't really maintain the colors. So in these cases, what you can do is to double tap on the layer and choose dry layer here at the bottom. So now that we dry the layer, notice that when I'm painting over it, it's not going to be blending with everything else. So it's much easier to find and create a more sharper edge. Now this is obviously a little bit too much, so I just went too far there. I'm going to reduce the brush size. I'm just going to do a very small little top here. It doesn't need to be too defined. Going all the way up somewhere around there. Okay, so from a distance this looks quite nice. Maybe we can just introduce a little bit of dark colors, even from the trees, indicate like as if there is something there, and then further down as well. Yeah, I think that looks quite nice in the background. Now don't forget that we need to add a bit of the reflection in as well. So I'm just going to use a bit of white here at the bottom. So something like that. And then also a little bit of the red from the top, just as an indication in the reflection. And last but not least, let's also put a cloud in the sky, again on a separate layer. For this, just for a change, I'm going to use a pixel brush. And there is a brilliant one under the effects category, which is actually perfect for clouds. So we have clouds soft and clouds scattered. I actually like clouds soft, so I'm going to select that and set the color to something that will work in this scenario. You can see if I'm using a color from the mountains, that works for something like a sunset or twilight, which is perfect for this image. So I'm going to maybe just reduce the brush size a bit and paint the cloud. Actually, I liked it before. Yeah, something like that. And then we can pick a brighter color as well. And notice that the sun is most likely to the left on the image, because those are the parts that are brighter. So I'm going to make the left side of my cloud also brighter. And of course, because we've done this on a separate layer, we can easily move it around and resize it as well. And that's the amazing thing about doing digital paintings, because it gives you this flexibility. You can make changes later. You can even move the cloud further out towards the edge or further down if you want to test it out how it looks there, or make it really small and less significant in the background. I'm going to keep it fairly big, maybe something like that. But I also wanted to show you that, of course, we have layer blending options as well. So if I go into the layer properties and change the blend mode, in this case to maybe overlay, that's going to result in a much more subtle effect where only the brighter details will show. And with this, I can make it slightly bigger, something like that. And then if I wanted to make it stronger, I can just tap on the layer and duplicate it. So you see now we have two of it, but I think that is just perfect. I didn't want this to be overpowering the whole composition. And there's one last thing I want to show you, and that is what I call the drip effect, to make it look like paint was actually dripping at the bottom, as if this was a canvas that was set up vertically and some of the paint was dripping down, which can easily happen when you're working with watercolor and there's no masking tape on the canvas. Now, of course, this is something you might want to avoid, or you can have the artistic decision to include it in the artwork. So what I'm going to do is to select the background layer for this, and I'm going to go back to the live brushes, watercolor, and within there the watercolor wet spatter this time. With that, I am going to reduce the opacity to 0% and start painting around the edges. So you can see how it starts to melt these details at the bottom, which is quite nice. We can make it maybe a bit smaller. Yeah. That looks quite nice, the way it goes down. Now we can also do this on a separate layer. So if I create another layer and I switch to the round detail brush, with this one I can sample a color and start painting down. So almost like creating a drip, and also maybe sample another color, create another drip. And this might be a little bit of an overkill, but it's completely up to you what you want to create. So if you fancy doing these details, then it's quite easy to do it. You can vary the brush size a bit. Just try to keep it vertical. And there you go. Maybe one more here on the right side. So I sample the color. And just a little bit of indication of wetness, as if the paint was dripping down. And that pretty much is the final result that I wanted to show you here. So I'm going to hide my layers, put this into full screen, and zoom and keep this in the middle so you can see it. I would spend more time on refining details like the tree line, also the mountains in the background, and I would continue to add some additional details. So in the beginning, you wash out a lot of details and then you start reintroducing some selectively on the areas where you want to draw your viewers' attention. Thanks a lot for watching. Like and share this video if you enjoyed it. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon to get notified whenever we release new videos. Click on the link on my right and start your membership today to get access to over 200 hours of training courses and personal mentoring by me and my team of creative professionals. Have fun learning, guys, and I will see you in the next one.